Of energy. Transfer of energy. The sun is the principal source of energy input to biological systems. Energy flows through living organisms, including light energy from the sun and chemical energy in organisms. Energy is eventually transferred to the environment, e.g., as heat. Food chains and food webs. A food chain with 3 trophic levels. A food chain shows the transfer of energy from one organism to the next, starting with a producer. The source of all energy in a food chain is light energy from the sun. The arrows in a food chain show the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the next. Energy is transferred from one organism to another by ingestion, eating. In the food chain above. Food webs. A food web is a network of interconnected food chains. Food webs are more realistic ways of showing connections between organisms within an ecosystem, as animals rarely exist on just one type of food source. A food web shows the interdependence of organisms. Food webs give us a lot more information about the transfer of energy in an ecosystem. They also show interdependence, how the change in one population can affect others within the food web. For example, in the food web above, if the population of earthworms decreased, the population of grass plants would increase as there are now fewer species feeding off them. The populations of frogs and mice would decrease significantly as earthworms are their only food source. The population of sparrows would decrease slightly as they eat earthworms but also have another food source to rely on, caterpillars. Most of the changes in populations of animals and plants happen as a result of human impact, either by overharvesting of food species or by the introduction of foreign species to a habitat. Due to interdependence, these can have long-lasting knock-on effects to organisms throughout a food chain or web. Exam tip. Questions about interdependence in food webs are common and easy to gain marks on if you answer them fully and correctly. Do not say an animal or plant would die out, as this is unlikely to happen. Stick to using the words decrease or increase. If in doubt, always give your reason for the increase or decrease in population. Pyramids of number. A pyramid of numbers shows how many organisms we are talking about at each level of a food chain. The width of the box indicates the number of organisms at that trophic level. For example, consider the following food chain. A food chain shows the transfer of energy. Ask yourself the following questions. Is it likely that there would be more voles in an area than grass plants? How many voles might one barn owl need to eat per day? If it's more than one, is it likely that there are more barn owls in an area than voles? So, a pyramid of numbers for this food chain would look like this. A pyramid of numbers. Despite the name and the example above, a pyramid of numbers doesn't always have to be pyramid-shaped. For example, pyramids of numbers are not always pyramid-shaped. This is because the size of the organism is also important. One large organism, like the oak tree in the pyramid above, contains enough energy to support many smaller organisms, the insects. Rules to remember when drawing a pyramid of numbers. You cannot change the trophic level of the organisms, they must stay in the same order as in the food chain, with producers on the bottom, followed by primary consumers, then secondary consumers, then tertiary consumers. Generally, the larger an individual organism is, the less of them there are. Pyramids of biomass. A pyramid of biomass shows how much mass the creatures at each level would have without including all the water that is in the organisms there, dry mass. Pyramids of biomass are always pyramid-shaped, regardless of what the pyramid of numbers for that food chain looks like. This is because the mass of organisms has to decrease as you go up a food chain. If we take our first food chain as an example, it's impossible to have 10 kilograms of grass feeding 50 kilograms of voles feeding 100 kilograms of barn owls. A pyramid of biomass. Pyramids of biomass provide a much better idea of the quantity of the plant or animal material at each level of a food chain and therefore are a better way of representing interdependence within the food chain. Exam tip. Pyramids of biomass are generally pyramid-shaped, so they are simple to draw. Some ecosystems, such as an aquatic ecosystem, may show a different shape or inverted pyramid, but it is very unlikely you will see this in an exam. Pyramids of number can be any shape, so make sure you learn the rules for drawing a pyramid of numbers, as it is more common to see unusual shapes in the exam. Pyramids of energy, extended. In order for the energy to be passed on, it has to be consumed, eaten. However, not all of the energy grass plants receive goes into making new cells that can be eaten. The same goes for the energy the vole gets from the grass, and the energy the barn owl gets from the vole. Only the energy that is made into new cells remains with the organism to be passed on. Even then, some of this energy does not get consumed. For example, few organisms eat an entire organism, including roots of plants or bones of animals, but energy is still stored in these parts and so it does not get passed on. The majority of the energy an organism receives gets lost, or used, through making waste products, e.g., urine, that get removed from the organism. As movement, as heat in mammals and birds that maintain a constant body temperature. As undigested waste feces that is removed from the body and provides food for decomposers. This inefficient loss of energy at each trophic level explains why food chains are rarely more than 5 organisms long. In the example above, something that preyed regularly on the barn owl would only get 0.1 J of energy from each barn owl it ate. In order to survive, it would have to eat a huge number of them every day to get the amount of energy it needed to survive. Are there that many barn owls close together? Not expend much energy itself hunting them, is this likely? Energy is lost at each trophic level for several reasons. A typical pyramid of energy would look like this. Energy transfer in a human food chain. Humans are omnivores, obtaining energy from both plants and animals, and this gives us a choice of what we eat. These choices, however, have an impact on what we grow and how we use ecosystems. Think of the following food chains both involving humans. Wheat right pointing arrow cow right pointing arrow human. Wheat right pointing arrow human. Given what we know about energy transfer in food chains, it is clear that if humans eat the wheat there is much more energy available to them than if they eat the cows that eat the wheat. This is because energy is lost from the cows, so there is less available to pass on to humans. Therefore, it is more energy efficient within a crop food chain for humans to be the herbivores rather than the carnivores. In reality, we often feed animals on plants that we cannot eat, e.g. grass, or that are too widely distributed for us to collect, e.g. algae in the ocean which form the food of fish we eat. Exam tip. This is a complicated concept, but by learning the main ways in which energy is lost between trophic levels, you will be able to answer most questions on this topic. Make sure you read the question carefully and tailor your answer to the specific organism you are being asked about, e.g. plants do not produce urine or feces, so you could not give this as one of the ways in which they use energy that cannot be passed on. Home. Join. Now. GCSE. IGCSE. AS. A-Level. O-Level. IB. AP. Other. Hub. Megaphone introducing flashcards high voltage, a new way to learn on Save My Exams. Let's go. IGCSE Biology CIE Revision Notes 19. Organisms and their environment 19.1 Energy and feeding relationships 19.1.5 Nutrient cycles. Nutrient cycles, CIGCSE Biology. Revision note. Download PDF. Test yourself. Flashcards. Author. Phil. Expertise. Biology. Did this video help you? Yes. No. The carbon cycle. Nutrients such as carbon and nitrogen are not endless resources. There is a finite amount of each element on the planet, and as such, they need to be recycled in order to allow new organisms to be made and grow. Carbon is taken out of the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide by plants to be used for photosynthesis. It is passed on to animals and microorganisms by feeding. It is returned to the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide by plants, animals and microorganisms as a result of respiration. If animals and plants die in conditions where decomposing microorganisms are not present, the carbon in their bodies can be converted, over millions of years and significant pressure, into fossil fuels. When fossil fuels are burned, the process is known as combustion. The carbon combines with oxygen and carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Increased use of fossil fuels is contributing to an increase in the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere. In addition, mass deforestation is reducing the amount of producers available to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere by photosynthesis. This problem is exacerbated by the fact that in many areas of the world, deforestation is taking place for land rather than for the trees themselves, and as such they are burnt down, releasing yet more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The carbon cycle. Exam tip. The carbon cycle is simple. Carbon is taken out of the atmosphere by photosynthesis. It is passed on to animals and decomposers by feeding. It is returned by respiration, in plants, in animals, and in decomposing microorganisms. In addition, it is returned in increasing amounts by combustion of fossil fuels. You should be able to identify what each arrow represents in any diagram of the carbon cycle. The nitrogen cycle. Extended. Nitrogen as an element is required to make proteins. Neither plants nor animals can absorb it from the air, as N2 gas is very stable and cannot be easily broken down. Two ways that nitrogen gas in the air can be converted into a usable form are: nitrogen-fixing bacteria convert N2 gas into ammonium compounds, which can then be converted to usable nitrates. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria can be free-living in the soil or can live within the root nodules of some plants. Lightning can split the bond between the two N atoms, turning them into nitrous oxides like N2O and NO2 that dissolve in rainwater and leach into the soil. Plants absorb nitrogen from the soil in the form of nitrates and use it to build proteins. Animals eat the plants and get the nitrogen they need from the plant proteins. This nitrogen is passed up the food chain when secondary consumers eat primary consumers, etc. Waste urine and feces from animals sends nitrogen back into the soil in the form of ammonium compounds. E.g., the urea in urine contains nitrogen. The bodies of dead plants and animals decay and all the proteins inside them are broken down into ammonium compounds by decomposers. The plants can't absorb ammonium compounds, so nitrifying bacteria convert the ammonium compounds to nitrites and then to nitrates, which can then be absorbed by plants, and so the cycle goes on. Denitrifying bacteria take nitrates out of the soil and convert them back into N2 gas. This process reduces soil fertility and is bad for plant growth. Denitrifying bacteria are anaerobic, so aerating the soil, e.g., by reducing waterlogging and turning over the soil during plowing, can reduce the rate of denitrification. The nitrogen cycle involves nitrogen fixation, decomposition, nitrification, and denitrification. Definition of population. A population is defined as a group of organisms of one species, living in the same area at the same time. Other important definitions. A community is defined as all of the populations of different species in an ecosystem. An ecosystem is defined as a unit containing the community of organisms and their environment, interacting together, e.g., a decomposing log, a lake. Population growth. All living organisms compete with each other for food, water, and living space. Those which are the best adapted to their environments generally increase their populations at the expense of those less well adapted. Population growth in most organisms is controlled by the following three factors: food supply, predation, disease. The population growth curve, extended. If the growth of microorganisms in a fermenter is measured over time, the population growth looks like the graph below. A typical growth curve for a population in an enclosed environment. The shape of this curve, a little like an S, gives it its name, a sigmoid growth curve. The curve has four distinct phases. Lag phase, organisms are adapting to the environment before they are able to reproduce. In addition, at this stage there are very few organisms and so reproduction is not producing larger numbers of offspring. Log phase, aka exponential phase, food supply is abundant, birth rate is rapid and death rate is low, growth is exponential and only limited by the number of new individuals that can be produced. Stationary phase, population levels out due to a factor in the environment, such as a nutrient, becoming limited as it is not being replenished. Birth rate and death rate are equal and will remain so until either the nutrient is replenished or becomes severely limited. Death phase, population decreases as death rate is now greater than birth rate. This is usually because food supply is short or metabolic wastes produced by the population have built up to toxic levels. Organisms in a natural environment are unlikely to show population growth like a sigmoid growth curve because they are affected by many other factors, including changing temperature or light, predators, disease, immigration, individuals moving into the area, emigration, individuals moving out of the area,